Captain Stella Reynolds had a way of making recruits tremble. At 6 feet tall with steel gray eyes that could freeze a lake in July, she commanded respect with a single glance. Her office at Fort Carter's Advanced Infantry Training Facility was a monument to military precision, not a paper out of place, not a speck of dust on her collection of commendations. In 15 years of service, she'd broken records, lead combat missions across 3 continents, and earned a reputation as the toughest, most demanding officer on base. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Private Madison Parker. Captain Reynolds read from the file, her voice dripping with contempt. 23 years old, 5'4", no combat experience. She looked up at the young woman standing at attention before her desk. Tell me again how you qualified for my advanced tactical training program. Madison stood perfectly still, her uniform pressed to military precision, despite the Georgia heat that seeped through the office windows. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in regulation braids, not a strand out of place. But it was her eyes that told the real story, clear, focused, with a quiet determination that seemed to look right through the captain's intimidation tactics. I ranked first in my class at basic training, ma'am, Madison replied, her voice steady and controlled. Top scores in marksmanship, tactical assessment, and field operations. Captain Reynolds leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. Paper qualifications don't mean anything in my program, Private. This isn't some classroom exercise where you can memorize the right answers. This is about instinct, about making life or death decisions under pressure. She stood up, towering over Madison. And frankly, I don't think you have what it takes. Madison didn't flinch. With respect, Captain, I believe my performance will speak for itself. A cold smile crossed the captain's face. We'll see about that. She slid a folder across the desk. Report to Sergeant Miller at 0500 hours tomorrow. Your evaluation begins then. As Madison left the office, Captain Reynolds watched through the window as the young private walked across the training yard. Her posture perfect, her pace measured and confident. There was something about the girl that irritated her. Perhaps the quiet confidence, or the way she hadn't shown a hint of intimidation during their meeting. Whatever it was, Reynolds was determined to see that confidence crumble. That evening in the mess hall, Madison sat alone at a corner table with her tray of standard military fare. The conversations around her were loud and boisterous, but she ate methodically, her mind already preparing for tomorrow's challenges. Well, came a voice from behind her. Madison turned to see Sergeant Miller, a weathered veteran with 20 years of service etched into his face. So you're the new recruit that's got Captain Reynolds all worked up. Sir, Madison kept her expression neutral. The captain doesn't like surprises, Private. And you, he said, dropping his voice, are definitely a surprise. Word is you broke every qualification record at basic. He studied her face. She's going to make your life hell, you know that, right? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Madison nodded once. I expected nothing less, sir. Miller chuckled, a sound like gravel shifting. Smart girl. But being smart won't be enough tomorrow. Get some rest, Private. You're going to need it. Back in her quarters, Madison carefully laid out her gear for the morning, checking each item with methodical precision. Her bunkmates watched with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. You're really going through with this? Asked Private Ramirez, a stocky woman from Texas who'd been friendly since Madison's arrival. Everyone knows Captain Reynolds has it in for female recruits who score too high. Last year, she washed out 3 women who were at the top of their class. Madison's hands moved with practiced efficiency, cleaning her tactical gear. I'm aware of the captain's reputation. Then you know she'll find a way to fail you no matter how well you do, Ramirez persisted. Madison looked up, her eyes meeting Ramirez's. Maybe, but she'd have to work for it. What none of them knew was that Madison Parker had spent her entire life preparing for challenges like this. Raised by a single mother who'd served as a combat medic in 2 wars, Madison had grown up understanding that the world would always demand more from her than from others. She'd learned to shoot at 7, could field strip a rifle blindfolded by 12, and had memorized every military tactical manual she could get her hands on before she was old enough to enlist. More importantly, they didn't know about the photograph she kept tucked inside her uniform, her mother in combat gear, standing proudly beside her unit in Afghanistan. The same mother who died saving 3 of her fellow soldiers during an ambush. The same mother whose last words to Madison had been, "Never let them tell you what you can't do." The morning alarm blared at 0430, jolting the barracks awake. Madison was already dressed and making her bunk when her bunkmates were still fumbling for their boots. "Show off," muttered one of the women, struggling to get her uniform straight. The evaluation course was notorious throughout Fort Carter. A 5-mile tactical obstacle course designed to simulate combat conditions, while testing every physical and mental capability a soldier possessed. Most recruits were given a week to prepare. Madison had been given less than 12 hours. Captain Reynolds stood at the starting line, clipboard in hand, her face a mask of professional detachment. But Madison could see the anticipation in her eyes, the barely concealed hope that she was about to witness a spectacular failure. "The course record is 47 minutes, 12 seconds, Reynolds announced, looking directly at Madison. "Anything over an hour is an automatic failure. You'll be assessed on speed, accuracy, and tactical decision-making." She checked her watch. "Your time starts now." Madison took off at a controlled pace, her breathing steady as she approached the first obstacle, a 20-foot wall with minimal handholds. As she began to climb, she could feel Captain Reynolds watching her, waiting for the first sign of weakness. The next 2 hours were a blur of crawling through mud, scaling walls, navigating barbed wire, and making split-second tactical decisions in simulated combat scenarios. Through it all, Madison maintained her focus, drawing on years of preparation and an inner determination that burned hotter than the Georgia sun overhead. When she finally crossed the finish line, her uniform caked in mud and sweat pouring down her face, Captain Reynolds was waiting, stopwatch in hand. Her expression was unreadable. 52 minutes, 43 seconds, Reynolds announced flatly. Not a record, but well under the failure threshold. Madison stood at attention, her breathing controlled despite the exhaustion burning in her lungs. "Your performance was adequate," Reynolds continued, the words sounding like an insult. "But this course is just the beginning. The real evaluation starts tomorrow with team tactical exercises." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "And that, Private Parker, is where most recruits like you fall apart. Individual skill means nothing if you can't function as part of a unit." Madison met her gaze steadily. "I understand, Captain." "Do you?" Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "We'll see." She turned to walk away, then paused. "Oh, and Parker, you'll be team leader for tomorrow's exercise. Your performance determines whether your entire squad passes or fails." As Captain Reynolds walked away, Sergeant Miller approached, his weathered face showing a hint of something that might have been respect. "Not bad, Parker," he said quietly. "Not bad at all." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," Miller warned. "The captain's just getting started. Team leader is a poisoned chalice. She's setting you up to fail in front of everyone." Madison nodded once. "I'm aware of that, sir." Miller studied her face. "You know, most recruits would be intimidated by now. Either that or angry. Would either reaction help me succeed, sir?" A slow smile crossed Miller's face. "No, I suppose not." He gestured toward the barracks. "Get cleaned up and get some rest. Tomorrow will make today look like a picnic." That evening, as Madison prepared her gear for the next day's challenge, she noticed the other recruits watching her with a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. Word of her performance had spread quickly through the barracks. "Is it true you finished the course in under an hour on your first try?" asked Private Jenkins, a lanky recruit from Oregon who'd been struggling with the physical demands of the program. 52 minutes and change, Madison replied, not looking up from her gear. "And Reynolds made you team leader for tomorrow?" Jenkins whistled low. "That's cold. Last 3 team leaders all washed out when their teams failed." Madison finally looked up. "Then we'll have to make sure our team doesn't fail." Later, as the barracks settled into the restless quiet of night, Madison lay in her bunk, reviewing tactical scenarios in her mind. Tomorrow would be the real test, not just of her individual skills, but of her ability to lead others under pressure. Captain Reynolds was clearly counting on her failure, expecting her to crumble under the weight of responsibility or alienate her teammates with her intensity. What the captain didn't know was that Madison had been studying leadership since she was old enough to read. Her mother's military journals and letters had been filled with insights about how to inspire confidence, build trust, and bring out the best in a diverse team. Those lessons had become part of Madison's DNA, as essential to her as breathing. As she drifted toward sleep, Madison's hand moved to the photograph hidden in her pocket, her mother's face. Tired but proud, amid the dust and danger of a war zone half a world away. "I won't let you down," she whispered to the darkness. "Not tomorrow, not ever." The team tactical exercise began at 0600 hours the following morning. Madison found herself in charge of a squad of 5 other recruits, all of whom regarded her with varying degrees of skepticism. Captain Reynolds had assembled the team with surgical precision. Each member represented a different kind of challenge for a leader. Private Jenkins was physically the weakest, still struggling with basic endurance. Private Ramirez was skilled but rebellious, resistant to authority. Private Chun was technically brilliant, but painfully shy and hesitant under pressure. Private Rodriguez was a natural athlete, but impulsive and prone to ignoring orders in favor of showboating. And Private Wilson was competent, but openly resentful of having a woman in charge. "Your mission," Captain Reynolds announced to the assembled team, "is to navigate to the objective point, retrieve the intel package, and return to base, all while evading or neutralizing opposition forces." She smiled thinly. "Simple enough, except that the opposition knows your route, outnumbers you 2 to 1, and has orders to stop you by any means necessary." Madison studied the tactical map they'd been provided, her mind already identifying potential ambush points and alternative routes. "You have 5 minutes to plan your approach," Reynolds continued. "Your performance will be evaluated on mission completion, team cohesion, tactical decision-making, and casualty prevention." She checked her watch. "Time starts now." Madison gathered her team quickly. "We need to move fast and stay unpredictable. The provided route is a trap. They'll be waiting for us at these 3 choke points." She indicated the locations on the map. "We'll take this alternative path instead." "That route's twice as long," Wilson objected. "We'll never make the time requirement." "It's longer but faster," Madison replied calmly. "The primary route has difficult terrain that will slow us down, and we'd have to fight through multiple ambushes." "And who made you the expert on?" Wilson began. "We don't have time to argue," Madison cut him off. "Each of you has strengths we need for this mission." She quickly assigned roles that played to each team member's abilities, putting Chun in charge of communications, Ramirez on point where her independence would be an asset, Jenkins on intel security where physical demands were lower, Rodriguez on rear security where his athleticism could keep them safe, and Wilson as her second in command where his competence and even his resentment could be channeled productively. "Any questions?" Madison asked, her tone making it clear that the time for debate was over. The team looked at each other, then back at Madison. No one spoke. Good. Remember, we move fast, stay quiet, and work together. Let's move out. As they began the exercise, Madison could feel Captain Reynolds watching from the observation point, waiting for the first sign of failure. But she kept her focus on the mission and her team, leading by example and adapting her approach too. Each team member's needs, firm direction for Rodriguez, quiet encouragement for Chun, respectful consultation with Wilson, challenging Ramirez with increased responsibility, and finding ways to make Jenkins feel valuable despite his limitations. The mission unfolded with unexpected smoothness. Madison's alternative route bypassed 3 major ambushes. Her tactical adjustments neutralized an unexpected opposition patrol, and her team began to function with increasing cohesion as they recognized the effectiveness of her leadership. Even Wilson's initial resistance began to fade as Madison consistently demonstrated competence, sought his input on key decisions, and shared credit for successful maneuvers. By the time they reached the objective point, the team was moving like a single organism, each member anticipating the needs of the others without explicit direction. The return journey presented new challenges. The opposition forces, realizing they'd been outmaneuvered, concentrated their efforts on cutting off the team's retreat. Madison led her squad through a series of evasive maneuvers, using terrain features and coordinated diversionary tactics to slip past superior numbers. When they finally reached the extraction point and completed the mission, Madison's team was intact, the intel package was secure, and they'd finished 17 minutes under the time requirement, a performance that surpassed every previous record for the exercise. Captain Reynolds stood waiting, her clipboard in hand and her expression unreadable. The other instructors, however, were less guarded. Sergeant Miller's face showed open approval, and even the typically stern Master Sergeant Ortiz looked impressed. Team performance was satisfactory, Captain Reynolds said finally, the words clearly costing her considerable effort. Mission objectives accomplished, no casualties sustained, time requirements met. She looked directly at Madison. Your leadership approach was unconventional. Thank you, Captain, Madison replied evenly. Reynolds' eyes narrowed. That wasn't a compliment, Private. Unconventional approaches lead to unpredictable outcomes. And unpredictable outcomes get people killed in real combat situations. She made a note on her clipboard. Report to my office at 1800 hours for your final evaluation. As Captain Reynolds walked away, Madison's team gathered around her, their earlier skepticism replaced by unmistakable respect. That was amazing, Chun said quietly. I've never made it through that exercise without getting killed at least twice. The way you predicted those ambush points, Rodriguez added, shaking his head. How did you know? Madison smiled slightly. I paid attention to the terrain and thought about where I would set up if I were the opposition commander. Wilson approached last, his earlier resentment visibly diminished. I owe you an apology, Parker, I thought. He hesitated. Well, I made assumptions I shouldn't have made. Apology accepted, Madison said simply. You performed well today. As the team headed back to the barracks, Sergeant Miller fell into step beside Madison. Impressive performance out there, Parker. One of the best I've seen in 15 years of running that exercise. Thank you, sir. Miller glanced in the direction Captain Reynolds had gone. Don't expect the same reaction from the captain, though. She's not a fan of being proven wrong. I'm not looking for her approval, sir, Madison replied. Just the opportunity to continue the program. Miller studied her face. You know, most recruits would be celebrating right now. Either that or nervous about the final evaluation. Would either reaction help me succeed, sir? Madison asked, echoing their conversation from the previous day. Miller laughed outright. You're something else, Parker. His expression grew more serious. But be careful with Reynolds. She doesn't take challenges to her authority lightly, and right now, your success feels like exactly that to her. At precisely 1800 hours, Madison knocked on the door of Captain Reynolds' office, her uniform immaculate, and her posture perfect despite the physical demands of the day's exercise. "Enter," came the captain's voice. Madison stepped inside and stood at attention before the desk. Reynolds was reviewing what appeared to be Madison's file, her expression thoughtful rather than hostile, an unexpected change that put Madison instantly on alert. "At ease, Private," Reynolds said without looking up. "Your performance today was excellent by any objective measure. Your tactical decisions were sound, your leadership approach was effective, and your team achieved results that exceeded all reasonable expectations." "Thank you, Captain." Reynolds finally looked up, her steel-gray eyes studying Madison's face. "Which makes me wonder why someone with your obvious abilities chose to enlist rather than pursuing an officer's commission through West Point or ROTC. Your test scores and academic background would have made you a strong candidate." Madison hesitated, uncertain if this was part of the evaluation or something else entirely. "You may speak freely, Private," Reynolds said, her tone softer than Madison had ever heard it. "My mother was an enlisted soldier, ma'am," Madison replied. "She believed that the best officers were those who understood the perspective of the enlisted ranks from personal experience." "Your mother," Reynolds repeated, turning back to the file. "Master Sergeant Eleanor Parker, 6-8W combat medic, 3 tours in Afghanistan. Recipient of the Silver Star and Purple Heart." She looked up again. "Killed in action during an ambush near Kandahar while evacuating wounded personnel." Madison's face remained impassive, but she felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with any mention of her mother's death. "Yes, ma'am." Captain Reynolds was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she stood and walked to the window, looking out over the training grounds. "I knew your mother, Parker," she said finally. "We served together during my second tour in Afghanistan. I was a young lieutenant then, fresh out of West Point, and certain I knew everything there was to know about combat leadership." A faint smile crossed her face. "Your mother had a way of correcting that impression without ever being insubordinate." Madison felt her carefully maintained composure slipping. "You knew my mother?" Reynolds turned back to face her. "She saved my life during the same ambush that took hers. I was wounded, unable to move, and she came back for me despite direct orders to evacuate with the rest of the unit." The captain's voice remained steady, but something in her eyes had changed. "She dragged me 200 meters under heavy fire, got me to the evacuation point, and then went back for others." Madison stood perfectly still, absorbing this unexpected connection to her mother's final moments. "I didn't make the connection when your file first crossed my desk," Reynolds continued. "Parker is a common name, and I was focused on your qualifications, not your personal background. It wasn't until after today's exercise, when I reviewed your file more thoroughly, that I realized who you were." She returned to her desk and sat down. "Which puts me in a rather unusual position. I've spent the past 3 days trying to break you, to prove that you didn't belong in my program." She met Madison's gaze directly. "And in doing so, I've dishonored the memory of the woman who gave her life to save mine." "Captain, Madison began. "I owe you an apology, Private Parker," Reynolds interrupted. "My treatment of you has been unprofessional and unworthy of this uniform." She straightened in her chair. "More importantly, I failed to see what should have been obvious from the beginning, that you are exactly the kind of soldier this program was designed to develop." Madison remained silent, struggling to process this sudden reversal. "Your final evaluation is simple," Reynolds continued. "You've passed every test I've put before you, demonstrated exceptional tactical acumen, and shown leadership abilities far beyond your experience level." She pushed a folder across the desk. "Inside you'll find your official acceptance into the Advanced Infantry Training Program, along with my personal recommendation that you be considered for Officer Candidate School following completion of this course." Madison stepped forward and took the folder, her composure finally cracking to reveal genuine surprise. "Thank you, Captain." Reynolds stood and extended her hand. "No, Private Parker. Thank you for reminding me what real strength looks like." Her voice softened slightly. "Your mother would be proud of the soldier you've become." "I know I am." As Madison shook the captain's hand, she felt a weight lifting, not just the pressure of the past few days, but something deeper. For years, she'd been driven by the need to honor her mother's memory, to live up to the legacy of a hero she'd never see again. Now, through this unexpected connection, she'd been given a gift, the knowledge that her path was the right one, that her mother's sacrifice continued to ripple outward in ways neither of them could have imagined. "Permission to speak freely, Captain?" Madison asked. Reynolds nodded. "Granted. My mother used to say that the true measure of a leader isn't how they treat people who can help them, but how they respond when they realize they've been wrong." Madison met the captain's gaze steadily. "By that standard, you've just demonstrated real leadership." A genuine smile crossed Reynolds' face, the first Madison had seen. "Your mother always did have a way with words." She gestured toward the door. "Report to Sergeant Miller tomorrow at 0600. The real training begins then." "Yes, ma'am," Madison replied, coming to attention and saluting. As she left the office and walked across the training yard in the fading Georgia light, Madison felt something shift inside her. The photograph in her pocket seemed lighter somehow, less a burden of expectation and more a connection to something larger than herself. Captain Reynolds watched from her window as the young private made her way toward the barracks, her posture still perfect, but with a new confidence in her step. For the first time in years, the captain felt the weight of a debt finally being repaid, not fully, never fully, but meaningfully nonetheless. Tomorrow, training would begin in earnest. Captain Reynolds would push Private Parker harder than any recruit before her, not out of spite or prejudice, but because she now recognized the extraordinary potential waiting to be developed. And Madison Parker would meet every challenge head-on, no longer fighting just to prove herself, but to become the leader she was always meant to be. The war of wills between them had ended. A different kind of journey, one of mutual respect and shared purpose, was just beginning. 6 months into Fort Carter's advanced infantry training program, Private Madison Parker's reputation had transformed from the recruit Captain Reynolds tried to break to the soldier everyone wanted on their team. Her tactical instincts, calm under pressure, and natural leadership abilities had earned her the respect of instructors and fellow trainees alike. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon as Madison led her squad through the pre-dawn mist, each member moving with the synchronized precision that had become their trademark. What had once been a collection of mismatched personalities had evolved into one of the most effective tactical units in the program's history. "Contact front," Madison whispered into her unit, dropping to one knee and signaling for her team to take cover. Through the early morning haze, she could make out the opposing force. Instructors playing the role of enemy combatants, positioned along the ridgeline ahead. Rodriguez Chun, left flank. Wilson, Jenkins, right flank. Ramirez with me on center. Standard pincer maneuver, execute on my mark. Her commands were quiet, but clear, each word carrying the confidence of someone who knew her team would respond without question. 3 minutes later, the exercise ended with Madison's squad successfully neutralizing the entire opposition force without taking a single casualty, a feat that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. "Outstanding work, Parker," Sergeant Miller said as the team regrouped at the extraction point. "Captain Reynolds wants to see you in her office at 1300 hours. Madison nodded, her expression revealing nothing of her curiosity about the summons. In the months since their confrontation and unexpected reconciliation, her relationship with Captain Reynolds had evolved into something neither of them could have anticipated, a mentorship built on mutual respect and shared determination. At precisely 1300 hours, Madison knocked on the captain's door. "Enter," came the familiar command. Captain Reynolds was standing by the window, looking out over the training grounds. The office that had once felt like a battleground to Madison now felt like something closer to a sanctuary, a place where honest conversations happened and real growth occurred. "You wanted to see me, Captain." Reynolds turned, her usually stern expression softened by what appeared to be genuine pride. "Your final evaluations came in this morning. You've set new program records in tactical assessment, leadership efficiency, and mission success rate." She gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Madison. We need to talk about your future." The use of her first name, something that had started happening in their private meetings about 3 months into the program, still felt strange to Madison, but she took the offered seat. "As you know," Reynolds continued, "your original training cycle ends in 2 weeks. Under normal circumstances, you'd receive your advanced qualification and assignment to a regular unit." She paused, studying Madison's face. "But your circumstances are far from normal. Ma'am, I've received 3 separate requests for your assignment after graduation." Reynolds picked up a folder from her desk. "The first is from Colonel Westfield at the Ranger Assessment Program. He's impressed with your tactical scores and wants you for their next selection class." Madison's pulse quickened. The Rangers were elite special operations forces, and women had only recently been allowed to attempt qualification. An invitation to assessment was rare and coveted. "The second is from Major Hassan at the Advanced Leadership Academy. He's offering a direct track to officer candidate school with accelerated promotion potential. The career implications of such an offer were significant: a faster path to commissioned rank and greater leadership opportunities. And the third," Reynolds continued, her voice taking on a different tone, "is from me." Madison looked up, surprised. "You, ma'am?" Reynolds set the folder down and met Madison's gaze directly. "I'm assembling a specialized training cadre, instructors, who will reshape how we prepare soldiers for modern combat environments. I need people who can not only perform at the highest level, but can teach others to do the same." She leaned forward slightly. "I want you on that team, Madison." The offer was unexpected, and Madison felt the weight of the decision before her. Each path offered different challenges and opportunities, different ways to honor her mother's legacy and build her own. "You don't need to decide right now," Reynolds said, reading Madison's expression. "You have 2 weeks before final assignments are made. But I want you to consider something your mother once told me." She paused, her eyes distant with memory. "She said that true strength isn't about how many people you can defeat, it's about how many you can lift up." Madison felt those words resonate deep within her. They sounded exactly like something her mother would say. "Thank you for the opportunities, Captain," she said finally. "I'll give them careful consideration." Reynolds nodded. "That's all I ask," dismissed. As Madison left the office, her mind was already turning over the possibilities before her. The Ranger path would test her limits and prove once and for all that women could excel in the most demanding combat roles. The officer track would give her greater authority and responsibility. But the teaching role, that offered something different, a chance to multiply her impact by shaping the next generation of soldiers. Back at the barracks, Madison found her squad gathered around a tactical map, planning for tomorrow's exercise. They looked up as she entered, their faces showing the easy camaraderie that had developed over months of shared challenges. "Everything okay with the captain?" Wilson asked. The former skeptic had become one of her strongest supporters, his initial resentment transformed into genuine respect. "Fine," Madison replied, not ready to share the news of her potential reassignment. "What are we looking at?" "Tomorrow's scenario," Rodriguez explained, pointing to the map. "Urban extraction with civilian presence and limited support." Chun came up with an approach that might work. Madison joined them, pushing the career decision temporarily aside to focus on the immediate challenge. As Chun walked through her proposed strategy, a creative solution that Madison Herself might not have considered. She felt a surge of pride in how far they'd all come. That evening, unable to sleep, Madison slipped out to the quiet training yard, finding a seat on one of the obstacle course platforms where she could look up at the stars. The Georgia night was warm and thick with the sounds of insects, the familiar chorus that had become the soundtrack to her transformation. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" came a voice from the darkness. Madison turned to see Private Ramirez approaching, her usual confident stride visible even in the dim starlight. "Too much on my mind," Madison admitted as Ramirez settled beside her on the platform. "Heard about your offers," Ramirez said. When Madison looked surprised, she shrugged. "News travels fast around here, especially good news. Rangers, OCS, or staying here as an instructor, pretty impressive options. How did you?" Jenkins was delivering reports to admin and overheard Captain Reynolds talking to Colonel Hartman about it. Ramirez grinned. "You know Jenkins, ears like a bat, and can't keep a secret to save his life." Madison shook her head, smiling despite her irritation at the breach of privacy. "I haven't decided yet." "What would your mom want you to do?" Ramirez asked quietly. The question caught Madison off guard. She'd shared some stories about her mother with the squad over the past months, but she hadn't realized how much they'd understood about that driving force in her life. "I'm not sure," Madison said honestly. She believed in challenging yourself, but she also believed in helping others reach their potential. Ramirez was quiet for a moment, looking up at the stars. "You know what I think?" she said finally. "I think she'd want you to stop trying so hard to follow in her footsteps and start making your own." The words hit Madison with unexpected force. Had she been so focused on honoring her mother's memory that she'd never fully considered what she truly wanted for herself? "Before I met you," Ramirez continued, "I was ready to wash out of this program. I had the skills, but not the discipline. Not the purpose. You showed me what it means to serve for something bigger than yourself." She turned to look at Madison. "Whatever you choose, make sure it's because it's right for you, not because it's what you think your mother would have wanted." As Ramirez left her alone with her thoughts, Madison pulled out the photograph she still carried, her mother in combat gear, standing with her unit. But for the first time, she didn't see it as a standard to live up to. Instead, she saw it as a beginning, the first chapter in a story that was still being written, a story that now included her own contributions to the legacy of service. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of final exercises, evaluations, and quiet contemplation. Madison excelled in every challenge, but her mind was increasingly focused on the decision that loomed at the end of the training cycle. On the morning before graduation, Captain Reynolds found Madison at the firing range, methodically working through target practice with her characteristic precision. "I thought I might find you here," Reynolds said, watching as Madison hit the center of the target with mechanical consistency. "Preparing for the Rangers already?" Madison lowered her weapon and turned to face the captain. "Actually, I've made my decision." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "And?" "I want to stay," Madison said simply. "As part of your training cadre." A smile, still rare enough to be noteworthy, crossed Reynolds' face. "May I ask why?" "The Rangers would challenge you in ways we can't match here, and OCS would put you on a faster track to higher leadership." Madison considered her words carefully. "My mother taught me that real strength is measured by impact, not rank or individual achievement. Here, I can help shape dozens, maybe hundreds of soldiers who will go on to lead others." She met Reynolds' gaze directly. "I want to build something that lasts beyond what I could accomplish alone." Reynolds nodded slowly. "Your mother would be proud of that reasoning." She gestured toward the base. "Walk with me." As they moved through the training grounds, Reynolds pointed out different groups of recruits, some struggling with basic skills, others showing promise but lacking confidence, a few demonstrating natural talent but resisting discipline. "Each of them has potential," Reynolds said. But potential without guidance is just untapped energy. She stopped and turned to Madison. What I'm building here isn't just another training program. It's a completely new approach to developing combat leaders, one that focuses on the whole soldier, not just technical skills. What do you mean? Madison asked. The military has always been good at teaching people how to fight, Reynolds explained. But we've been less effective at teaching them when to fight, why to fight, and how to lead others through the moral and ethical complexities of modern warfare. She gestured toward the recruits. These soldiers will face challenges our generation never imagined: hybrid threats, information warfare, autonomous weapon systems. They need more than just tactical training. They need a new kind of leadership. Madison felt a growing certainty that she'd made the right choice. And you want me to help build that? Yes, Reynolds said simply. But it won't be easy. You'll be challenging decades of military tradition, pushing against institutional resistance, and demanding more from these recruits than many believe they can give. Her expression grew serious. It will be harder than the Rangers, more frustrating than officer training, and the rewards will be less visible. I understand, Madison replied. Reynolds studied her face for a long moment. Yes, she said finally. I believe you do. She extended her hand. Welcome to the cadre, Sergeant Parker. Madison's eyes widened. Sergeant? Effective immediately, Reynolds confirmed. You've earned it, and you'll need the rank for the role I have in mind. As they shook hands, Madison felt the weight of the new responsibility settling on her shoulders, not as a burden but as a purpose. A direction that felt uniquely her own while still honoring everything her mother had taught her. Report to my office tomorrow after graduation, Reynolds said. We have work to do. The graduation ceremony was understated by military standards, a formation on the parade ground, the presentation of qualification badges, and brief speeches from base leadership. Madison stood tall as her new sergeant stripes were pinned to her uniform, accepting the congratulations of her former squad members with quiet pride. Sergeant Parker, Wilson said, shaking her hand with a grin. Has a nice ring to it. Don't forget us little people when you're running this place, Rodriguez added, his usual brashness tempered by genuine affection. Chun, still quiet but no longer painfully shy, simply nodded. You changed my life, she said softly. Thank you. Jenkins, who'd struggled more than any of them but had persevered through sheer determination, stood a little straighter as he saluted. Whatever you're staying to build, Sergeant, I want to be part of it. Ramirez was the last to approach, her expression knowing. You chose your own path, she said simply. Good. As the ceremony concluded and the graduates dispersed to celebrate or prepare for their new assignments, Madison found herself alone on the parade ground, looking out over the training facility that had challenged her, changed her, and ultimately become her home. Captain Reynolds appeared beside her, looking unusually reflective in the late afternoon sunlight. 15 years ago, she said quietly, your mother pulled me from the wreckage of an ambushed convoy. I was young, scared, and certain I was going to die in that godforsaken place. Madison listened silently, recognizing the rare gift of Reynolds sharing something so personal. She talked to me the whole time she was treating my wounds and dragging me to safety, Reynolds continued. Not about herself or the danger we were in, but about leadership, what it meant, why it mattered, how it could transform lives when done right. She turned to Madison. She said something I never forgot. The measure of your leadership isn't what you accomplish. It's who you become and who you help others become. Madison felt her throat tighten with emotion. That sounds like her. When she went back for the others and didn't return, I made a promise, Reynolds said, her voice steady despite the weight of the memory. I promised I would become the kind of leader she believed I could be. Not perfect, not always right, but always striving to lift others up rather than prove my own strength. She gestured toward the training grounds. This program is part of fulfilling that promise. And now, in an irony I could never have anticipated, her daughter will help me complete what your mother started. Reynolds met Madison's gaze directly. Life has a strange way of bringing things full circle. As the sun began to set over Fort Carter, casting long shadows across the training yard where Madison's journey had begun 6 months earlier, she felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the graduation ceremony or her promotion to sergeant. The war of wills that had started with Captain Reynolds' attempt to break her had transformed into something neither of them could have predicted: a partnership dedicated to reshaping how the military developed its future leaders. "Tomorrow morning, 0700 hours, Reynolds said, returning to her customary professional tone. "We have a new class of recruits arriving, and they have no idea what they're in for." Madison smiled. "Yes, ma'am." As Reynolds walked away, Madison took one last moment to look up at the darkening sky. Somewhere she felt certain her mother was watching, not as a standard impossible to live up to, but as a foundation upon which Madison was building something uniquely her own. The journey ahead would be challenging in ways she couldn't yet imagine. There would be institutional resistance to overcome, traditions to respectfully challenge, and a generation of soldiers to prepare for conflicts unlike any the military had faced before. But for the first time since enlisting, Madison felt completely certain of her path, not because it was what her mother would have wanted, but because it was what she herself believed in with her whole heart. Tomorrow would bring new recruits, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove what kind of leader she could be. Madison Parker, no longer just a soldier trying to honor her mother's memory, but a sergeant charting her own course while carrying forward the best of what she'd learned, was ready. The war of wills had ended. A different kind of journey, one of transformation, purpose, and lasting impact, was just beginning. 3 years had passed since Sergeant Madison Parker joined Captain Reynolds' elite training cadre at Fort Carter. In that time, the program had evolved from an experimental initiative into one of the military's most respected leadership development centers. Soldiers who completed their training under the Reynolds-Parker methodology didn't just excel tactically, they became transformative leaders who elevated every unit they joined. The sun was barely rising as Madison finished her morning run, the familiar Georgia humidity already hanging heavy in the air. At 26, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that had become legendary among the recruits, a presence that commanded respect without demanding it. "Good morning, Sergeant Parker," called a voice from the training yard. Private Diaz, one of their most promising recruits, was already setting up the day's obstacle course. Madison nodded her acknowledgement. "Starting early today, Diaz?" "Yes, ma'am. Team Delta has that evaluation this afternoon, and I wanted to make sure everything was perfect." Madison smiled. Diaz exemplified exactly what they'd been working to build: initiative, ownership, and a commitment to excellence that went beyond mere compliance with orders. 3 years ago, such behavior would have been exceptional. Now it was becoming the standard. As she headed toward her office, Madison noticed Captain Reynolds, now Major Reynolds, after a well-deserved promotion, observing the training grounds from her window. Their eyes met briefly, and Reynolds gestured for Madison to join her. The Major's office had changed over the years, becoming less a sanctuary of solitude and more a hub of innovation. The walls were covered with tactical diagrams, leadership models, and feedback from units that had received their graduates. It was a visual representation of what they'd built together, a new approach to military leadership that was slowly rippling through the entire armed forces. "You wanted to see me, Major?" Madison asked as she entered. Reynolds was studying a set of documents on her desk. "We've received some interesting feedback from Central Command," she said without looking up. "It seems our graduates are outperforming their peers by significant margins in combat leadership, unit cohesion, and adaptive decision-making." Madison felt a surge of pride. "That's good news." "It's better than good," Reynolds replied, finally looking up. It's validation of everything we've been working toward. She pushed the report across her desk. Read the section on Lieutenant Wilson's performance in Korea. Madison picked up the document, her eyes finding the relevant section. James Wilson, once her most skeptical squad member, had gone on to officer candidate school after completing their program. According to the report, his unit had successfully navigated a complex border incident that could have escalated into an international crisis. His commander specifically cited Wilson's exceptional ability to balance tactical requirements with strategic implications, and his extraordinary leadership in maintaining unit discipline under extreme pressure. Wilson always had potential, Madison said, setting the report down. He just needed to channel it properly. And that's exactly what you helped him do, Reynolds replied. But this isn't just about Wilson. We're seeing similar results across the board, which is why we've received this. She held up an official-looking letter bearing the Pentagon seal. What is it? Madison asked. An invitation, Reynolds said, her expression uncharacteristically animated. The Joint Chiefs want us to present our methodology at the National Defense Leadership Symposium next month. They're considering implementing elements of our program across all branches. Madison felt her breath catch. What had started as a specialized training cadre at a single base could potentially reshape leadership development throughout the entire military. There's more, Reynolds continued. They're also offering you a commission direct appointment to first lieutenant with accelerated promotion potential. Madison stared at her mentor, processing the implications. After 3 years as an NCO, deliberately choosing that path over officer training, she was being offered a commission based on the strength of her work and her demonstrated leadership abilities. I know it's a lot to take in, Reynolds said, watching Madison's face. But this is recognition of everything you've accomplished, everything you've built here. Madison's mind was already racing ahead, considering the possibilities and challenges this new path would present. As an officer, she would have different types of influence, more authority in some ways, less direct contact with troops in others. You don't have to decide immediately, Reynolds added. But the symposium is in 4 weeks, and they want an answer on the commission before then. Madison nodded, her training automatically kicking in. Assess the situation, identify key factors, develop a response plan. I'd like some time to consider it. Of course. Reynolds leaned back in her chair. In the meantime, we have more immediate concerns. The new training cycle starts tomorrow, and this group is unique. Unique how? Madison asked, grateful for the shift to practical matters. Reynolds handed her another file. We're receiving our first integrated cohort of international officers personnel from allied nations who will train alongside our people, then return to implement our methods in their own military organizations. Madison flipped through the file, noting representatives from Britain, South Korea, Germany, and several other countries. It's an opportunity to extend our influence beyond American forces, Reynolds explained. But it also presents new challenges. Different military cultures, language barriers, varying levels of experience with integrated units. Madison nodded, her mind already analyzing potential approaches. I'll start working on adaptation strategies today. As she turned to leave, Reynolds called after her. Madison! She paused, using her first name as she still did only in their most private conversations. What we're building here, it's becoming something bigger than either of us imagined. Madison smiled slightly. Isn't that what we wanted? Something that would outlast us? Reynolds returned the smile. Indeed it is. But remember what I told you when you first joined the cadre: institutional change is harder than any obstacle course. We're about to find out just how true that is. The following morning, Madison stood before the most diverse group of military personnel she'd ever addressed: 20 American soldiers, ranging from fresh-faced privates to seasoned sergeants, plus 10 international officers representing 6 different countries. The cultural and experiential differences were immediately apparent in everything from their posture to the way they scanned the room. "Welcome to Advanced Leadership Development," Madison began, her voice clear and confident. "You've been selected because your respective commands believe you have the potential to become transformative leaders. Our job is to help you fulfill that potential." She paused, making eye contact with each person in the room. "But I want to be clear about something from the start. This isn't a traditional military training program. We're not here to teach you how to follow orders or master standard tactics. Those are basic skills you should already possess." A British captain in the front row raised an eyebrow, slightly not disrespectful, but clearly skeptical. "Instead," Madison continued, "we're going to challenge everything you think you know about military leadership. We're going to push you beyond your comfort zones, force you to question your assumptions, and help you develop a leadership approach that works across cultural boundaries and in situations where there is no clear tactical doctrine to follow." She gestured toward the training yard visible through the windows. "Out there, you'll face physical challenges that test your limits. But the real work happens in here." She tapped her temple. "In how you think, how you solve problems, and most importantly, how you inspire others to follow you not because of your rank, but because of who you are and what you stand for." The room was silent, every face focused on her words. Madison could see varying reactions: excitement from some of the younger personnel, cautious interest from the experienced NCOs, polite attention from most of the international officers, and outright skepticism from a few. "Today, we begin with a simple question that will guide our entire program," she said. "What makes a leader worth following into battle? Not just obeying because of rank or regulation, but genuinely following, committing your life to their direction because you believe in them." She let the question hang in the air for a moment. "You have 1 hour to formulate your answer. When you return, be prepared to defend your position, because every person in this room will challenge it, including me." As the group dispersed to consider the assignment, Major Reynolds appeared beside Madison, watching the international officers clustering together for discussion. "Interesting approach," Reynolds commented. "Starting with philosophy rather than action. I want to establish from the beginning that this isn't about physical performance or tactical knowledge," Madison explained. "Those South Korean officers have more combat experience than most of our American recruits combined. The German captain has multiple advanced degrees in military strategy. But leadership is something different, something that transcends technical expertise." Reynolds nodded approvingly. "You've come a long way from the private who stood in my office 3 years ago, determined to prove herself." "I had a good teacher," Madison replied. The next several days revealed the magnitude of the challenge they'd undertaken. The international contingent brought perspectives that both enhanced and complicated the training. Cultural differences emerged in approaches to decision-making, attitudes toward authority, and even basic tactical doctrine. Captain Kim from South Korea emphasized disciplined execution and precise adherence to plans. Lieutenant Schmidt from Germany approached problems with methodical, analytical precision. Captain Bennett from Britain brought a pragmatic flexibility born from colonial peacekeeping operations. Each offered valuable insights, but integrating these diverse approaches into a cohesive leadership framework proved challenging. By the end of the first week, tensions were emerging. During a tactical exercise, a heated argument erupted between Captain Kim and Sergeant Rodriguez over the appropriate response to an ambush scenario. "Your approach unnecessarily risks civilian casualties," Kim insisted, his English precise but his tone frustrated. "And your approach risks the entire squad," Rodriguez countered. "Sometimes you have to accept calculated risks to achieve mission objectives." Madison observed the exchange without intervening, recognizing the valuable learning opportunity it presented. Only when the argument threatened to become personal did she step in. "Both of you have valid perspectives," she said calmly. The challenge of leadership isn't choosing between mission accomplishment and force protection, it's finding approaches that optimize both. She turned to address the entire group. This is exactly why we brought you together. No single military tradition has all the answers. The future of warfare will require leaders who can synthesize diverse approaches and adapt to complex, ambiguous situations. The confrontation became a turning point. Instead of avoiding cultural differences, the group began actively exploring them, seeking to understand the underlying values and experiences that shaped each perspective. As the second week began, Madison introduced a new element to the training: ethical decision-making under pressure. The scenario involved a simulated hostage situation with incomplete intelligence, time constraints, and significant political implications. You have 30 minutes to develop an action plan, she instructed. Your decisions will affect not just the tactical outcome, but the strategic situation for years to come. As the international teams huddled in intense discussion, Madison circulated among them, listening to their deliberations. The approaches varied dramatically from aggressive direct action to patient negotiation, but each team was grappling sincerely with the moral dimensions of their choices. When time expired, Madison brought the group together to present their solutions. What followed was one of the most sophisticated tactical discussions she'd ever witnessed, with each team defending their approach while acknowledging its limitations. Even more impressive was how they began building on each other's ideas, creating hybrid solutions that incorporated the best elements from different military traditions. That evening, as Madison updated her training notes, Major Reynolds joined her in the quiet classroom. "They're starting to gel," Reynolds observed. "Faster than I expected." Madison nodded. "It's remarkable how quickly they've moved from competition to collaboration. The international perspective is pushing our American personnel to question assumptions they didn't even realize they had." "And how are you feeling about the commission offer?" Reynolds asked, changing subjects with her characteristic directness. "The symposium is in 2 weeks. They'll want your answer soon." Madison set down her pen and considered the question. "I'm still weighing it. As an officer, I'd have more formal authority to implement changes, access to higher levels of planning and decision-making." "But," Reynolds prompted, hearing the hesitation in her voice. "But I wonder if my impact might actually be greater in my current role," Madison admitted. "What we're building here works partly because I can connect with enlisted personnel in ways officers sometimes can't. They see me as one of them, someone who understands their perspective." Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "Your mother faced a similar decision, you know." Madison looked up, surprised. "She did?" "Yes. After her second tour, she was offered a commission through the Battlefield Promotion Program. She declined." Reynolds smiled slightly at Madison's expression. "She told me she could do more good as a senior NCO than as a junior officer, that her influence came from who she was, not the rank on her collar." Madison felt a familiar pang at the mention of her mother, though the sharp grief had softened over the years into something more like inspiration. "I didn't know that." "She was wise," Reynolds continued. "She understood something that took me years to learn, that real leadership transcends rank structure. It's about who you are and what you stand for, not the authority vested in your position." For the next week, Madison immersed herself in the training program, temporarily setting aside the commission question to focus on the immediate challenges. The international cohort was progressing rapidly, moving from theoretical discussions to practical applications of their emerging leadership philosophy. The breakthrough came during a complex training exercise involving multiple simultaneous challenges: a medical emergency, a security threat, and a diplomatic incident, all requiring immediate attention with limited resources. Madison watched as Captain Bennett from Britain took charge, not by asserting his authority but by quickly assessing each team, members' strengths, and delegating responsibilities accordingly. He put Captain Kim in charge of security operations, leveraged Lieutenant Schmidt's analytical skills for resource allocation, and relied on Sergeant Rodriguez's experience with emergency medical procedures. The result was a seamlessly integrated response that resolved all three crises more effectively than any single approach could have managed. More importantly, every team member fully committed to the mission, not because Bennett outranked them, but because his leadership approach earned their trust and respect. As the exercise concluded, Madison gathered the group for debrief. "What just happened here," she said, "is exactly what we've been working toward. Not perfect adherence to any particular doctrine, but adaptive leadership that leverages diverse perspectives and builds genuine commitment." She looked at Bennett. "Captain, would you share what guided your approach?" The British officer thought for a moment. "I realized I didn't need to have all the answers myself. My job wasn't to be the expert on everything, but to create conditions where each person's expertise could be effectively applied." Madison nodded. "That's the essence of the leadership model we're developing here, not command based on authority, but leadership based on trust, mutual respect, and shared purpose." As the session ended and the trainees dispersed, Madison felt a quiet certainty settling within her. The work they were doing mattered, not just for the American military, but for how armed forces around the world approached leadership development. And her role in that work was becoming increasingly clear. The following morning, she knocked on Major Reynolds' door with her decision made. "Enter," came the familiar command. Reynolds was at her desk reviewing the latest assessment reports, but she set them aside as Madison entered. "You look like someone who's reached a conclusion," she observed. Madison nodded. "I have. I'm declining the commission offer." If Reynolds was surprised, she didn't show it. "May I ask why?" "Because my effectiveness comes from who I am, not the rank I hold," Madison replied, echoing her mother's wisdom. "As an officer, I'd gain certain types of authority, but lose the unique perspective that makes our program work." She moved to the window, looking out at the training yard where the international cohort was preparing for the day's exercises. "What we're building here is too important to risk changing the dynamics that make it successful." Reynolds joined her at the window. "And the symposium?" "I'll present our methodology alongside you," Madison said. "Not as someone seeking promotion or recognition, but as a leader committed to transforming how we develop the next generation of military personnel." Reynolds studied her face. "You know, when you first joined this program, I thought you were following in your mother's footsteps. Now I see you're charting a course entirely your own. Is that a good thing?" Madison asked, genuinely curious. "It's the best possible thing," Reynolds replied, "because it means you've become exactly the kind of leader we're trying to develop, someone who makes decisions based on principle rather than personal advancement, who measures success by impact rather than rank." She extended her hand. "The military needs officers, certainly. But perhaps even more, it needs leaders like you who remind us that integrity and moral courage matter more than the insignia on your collar." As they shook hands, Madison felt the weight of her decision, not as a burden but as a purpose, a direction that honored her mother's legacy while creating something uniquely her own. 2 weeks later, Madison stood on the stage at the National Defense Leadership Symposium, facing an audience of military leaders from across all service branches. The Joint Chiefs sat in the front row, their expressions attentive but reserved, hardened veterans who had seen countless training innovations come and go throughout their careers. "Traditional military leadership development," Madison began, "focuses primarily on tactical competence and command authority. We train officers to make decisions and enlisted personnel to execute them." She paused, looking directly at the assembled brass. "That model served us well in conventional conflicts with clear objectives and established doctrine. But it's insufficient for the complex, ambiguous challenges of modern warfare." She gestured toward the screen behind her, where images appeared of their international cohort engaged in various training scenarios. The future demands leaders at all levels who can navigate cultural differences, adapt to rapidly evolving situations, and build genuine commitment rather than mere compliance. For the next 30 minutes, Madison and Major Reynolds presented their methodology, supporting their approach with data from performance evaluations of their graduates in real-world operations. The results were compelling. Units led by their trainees showed significantly higher mission success rates, better stress management, lower casualties, and more effective cross-cultural operations. When they finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then the chairman of the Joint Chiefs rose to his feet, his expression thoughtful. "Sergeant Parker," he said, addressing Madison directly, "your presentation challenges many of our traditional assumptions about military leadership. What you're proposing would require significant institutional change, not just in training methods but in how we think about the relationship between rank and leadership." Madison stood straight, her gaze steady. "Yes, sir, it would. And yet," he continued, "the results speak for themselves." He turned to address the room. "This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need to prepare for future conflicts that will be unlike any we've faced before." In the days that followed, news of the symposium presentation spread throughout the military. What had begun as a specialized training program at Fort Carter was quickly becoming the blueprint for a transformative approach to leadership development across all services. 3 months later, Madison stood once again in Major Reynolds' office, this time reviewing the expansion plans for their program. What had started with a single training cadre would now include satellite centers at bases across the country and liaison positions with allied military organizations around the world. "It's happening faster than I ever imagined," Reynolds admitted, looking somewhat overwhelmed by the scale of what they'd set in motion. "The Joint Chiefs have made our methodology a strategic priority. We'll be training the trainers now, people who will take these principles back to their own units and countries." Madison nodded, feeling both pride and a healthy sense of responsibility. The real test will be maintaining the integrity of the approach as it scales. It's one thing to transform a small cohort under our direct supervision. It's another to reshape an entire institution. "True," Reynolds agreed. "Which is why our next phase is so critical." She handed Madison a folder. "These are your new orders. Effective immediately, you're promoted to Master Sergeant and appointed as the program's chief instructor." Madison opened the folder, scanning the official documents with a sense of quiet satisfaction. Not because of the promotion itself, but because of what it represented, recognition that her decision to remain an NCO had been the right one for the mission they were pursuing. "There's something else," Reynolds added, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "A personal request that came through channels I've never seen used before." She handed Madison another document, this one bearing presidential seals and signatures. "The Commander-in-Chief is establishing a special advisory council on military leadership development. He's personally requesting your participation." Madison stared at the document, momentarily speechless. "This is unprecedented?" Reynolds supplied. "Yes, it is. An enlisted advisor at that level, participating in strategic decision-making alongside the highest-ranking officers in the country." Her expression grew serious. "It's also validation of everything we've been saying, that leadership transcends rank, that diverse perspectives strengthen decision-making, that the future of our military depends on voices like yours being heard at the highest levels." As the significance of the moment settled around her, Madison thought back to the photograph she had carried for so many years, her mother in combat gear, standing proud amid the dust and danger of a war zone half a world away. The image was still precious to her, but it no longer represented a standard she struggled to live up to. Instead, it was a foundation upon which she had built something entirely new, a legacy of leadership that would shape the military for generations to come. "Your mother would be proud," Reynolds said softly, seeming to read her thoughts. "Not because you followed in her footsteps, but because you found the courage to create your own path." Madison nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "She used to tell me that real strength isn't about proving yourself to others. It's about standing firm in what you believe, even when the world tries to push you in a different direction." "Wise words," Reynolds said. "And you've honored them in the most meaningful way possible, not by repeating them, but by living them." As Madison left the office that evening, walking across the training grounds where her journey had begun 4 years earlier, she felt a profound sense of completion. The arrogant captain who had once tried to break her had become her greatest ally and mentor. The program they had built together was transforming not just individual soldiers, but the very culture of military leadership. And her own path, neither precisely like her mother's nor shaped by anyone else's expectations, had led her to a place of influence she could never have imagined. The war of wills that had begun in Captain Reynolds' office had evolved into something neither of them could have predicted, a partnership that was reshaping how the most powerful military in the world prepared its leaders for the challenges of an uncertain future. And Madison Parker, once just a determined private with something to prove, had become exactly the kind of leader the world needed most, someone who led not from position or authority, but from principle and purpose. The cycle had come full circle. A new chapter was beginning. Master Sergeant Madison Parker stood at the podium in the Pentagon's largest briefing room, looking out at an audience that would have seemed impossible just 5 years earlier. The Joint Chiefs of Staff sat in the front row alongside defense ministers and military commanders from a dozen allied nations. Behind them were hundreds of officers and senior enlisted personnel from every branch of service, all gathered for the unveiling of the Integrated Leadership Development Initiative, the program that had grown from Madison's work with Major Reynolds at Fort Carter. 5 years ago, Madison began, her voice carrying through the hushed room, we set out to answer a simple question. What makes a leader worth following? Not just obeying because of rank, but genuinely following, committing your life to their direction because you believe in them. She gestured toward the screen behind her, where images appeared of diverse military personnel engaged in complex training scenarios. What began as an experimental program at a single training base has evolved into a comprehensive methodology that's reshaping how we prepare leaders at every level of our armed forces. The data on the screen told a compelling story. Units commanded by graduates of their program showed dramatically improved metrics across every measure of operational effectiveness. Combat casualties were down 34%, mission success rates were up 42%, and perhaps most significantly, retention of high-performing personnel had increased by over 60%. But numbers only tell part of the story, Madison continued. The real impact is measured in the lives touched, the cultures transformed, and the conflicts averted, because our leaders now have the tools to navigate complexity with wisdom, rather than merely applying force. As she continued her presentation, Madison caught sight of familiar faces in the audience. There was Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds, promoted again for her pioneering work. Captain Wilson, her once skeptical squad mate, now commanded an elite unit that had recently prevented a border incident from escalating into open conflict. And Sergeant Major Ramirez, who had joined Madison on the training cadre and helped extend the program's reach to allied forces across Latin America. They were just a few of the hundreds of lives that had been transformed by a leadership philosophy built on mutual respect, adaptive thinking, and moral courage, principles that had once seemed radical but were now becoming fundamental to military doctrine worldwide. The challenges facing our armed forces in the coming decades will be unlike anything we've encountered before, Madison said, bringing her presentation to its conclusion. Hybrid threats, autonomous weapon systems, information warfare, climate-induced conflicts, these will require leaders who can transcend traditional military thinking. She paused, looking directly at the assembled brass. The strength of our forces will not be measured by technology alone, but by the quality of the decisions made by the men and women who deploy that technology. By investing in leadership development at every level, from private to general, we ensure that those decisions will be guided by wisdom, integrity, and a deep commitment to the values we've sworn to defend. The applause that followed was more than just professional courtesy. It was acknowledgement that Madison's vision had fundamentally altered how the military approached its most essential function: developing leaders who could navigate the complexities of modern warfare while upholding the highest ethical standards. After the presentation, Madison found herself surrounded by military officials from around the world, all eager to discuss implementation of the program in their own countries. But as the crowd thinned, a familiar figure approached: General Robert Hayes, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and one of the earliest champions of their leadership initiative. "Master Sergeant Parker," he said, his weathered face showing genuine respect, "your presentation was exceptional." The president was particularly impressed with the cross-cultural applications. "Thank you, sir," Madison replied. Hayes gestured toward a quieter corner of the room. "Walk with me. There's something we need to discuss." As they moved away from the crowd, Hayes's expression became more serious. "The National Security Council has been monitoring a developing situation in the Balkans. Ethnic tensions that we thought were resolved decades ago are flaring up again, complicated by regional powers using proxy forces to advance their interests." Madison listened carefully, aware that the chairman wouldn't be sharing this information without purpose. "Intelligence suggests we're looking at potential military intervention within the next 3 months, Hayes continued. "If that happens, we'll need commanders on the ground who understand the cultural complexities and can navigate a situation where the lines between combatants and civilians are dangerously blurred." He turned to face her directly. "The President has authorized me to assemble a specialized joint task force combining our best tactical units with experts in cultural mediation, information warfare, and humanitarian operations. I want you to be part of the command team." Madison felt a moment of surprise. Such positions were typically reserved for high-ranking officers, not enlisted personnel, regardless of their expertise. "In what capacity, sir?" "As Senior Leadership Development Advisor," Hayes replied. "You'd work directly with the task force commander to ensure our leadership approach is implemented effectively across all operational elements." He paused. "It would mean a temporary assignment away from the training program, but the real-world application of your methodology could save countless lives, both our personnel and civilians caught in the crossfire." It was an extraordinary opportunity, a chance to test the leadership principles she'd helped develop in one of the most complex and volatile regions in the world. But it also represented a profound responsibility. The lives of American service members and foreign civilians would hang in the balance. "I'd be honored, sir," Madison said after careful consideration. "When would the assignment begin?" "Immediately," Hayes replied. "Report to Camp Johnson tomorrow at 0700. You'll meet the task force commander and begin preliminary planning. Full briefing materials will be waiting for you." As Hayes moved away to speak with other officials, Lieutenant Colonel Reynolds appeared beside Madison, having overheard enough to understand the significance of the conversation. "So," Reynolds said quietly, "the theoretical becomes practical." Madison nodded. "The Balkans' potential deployment within 3 months." Reynolds studied her face. "Are you ready for this? It's one thing to teach leadership principles in a controlled environment. It's another to apply them when lives are on the line and the situation is deteriorating by the hour." "I've been preparing for this my entire career," Madison replied with quiet confidence. "We both have." Reynolds smiled slightly. "Yes, I suppose we have." She extended her hand. "Make us proud, Master Sergeant." As they shook hands, Madison felt the weight of the moment, not just the responsibility of the assignment, but the culmination of a journey that had begun when she'd stood at attention in Reynolds' office. determined to prove herself against a commander who seemed determined to see her fail. "I never would have predicted this," Reynolds said, as if reading her thoughts. "That day you walked into my office all perfect posture and quiet determination. I saw someone trying to follow in her mother's footsteps. I never imagined you'd end up charting the course that would change the entire military." Madison smiled. "Neither did I was just trying to honor her memory." "And now you're creating a legacy entirely your own," Reynolds replied. "One that will shape how we develop leaders for generations to come." The following morning, Madison arrived at Camp Johnson precisely at 0700, her gear packed for immediate deployment if necessary. The base was a hive of activity, with specialized units assembling from across all service branches: Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, Air Force Combat Controllers, Marine Force Recon, the elite of the elite, all converging for what promised to be an extraordinarily complex operation. As she approached the command center, a tall figure in battle-worn camouflage emerged from the building: Colonel James Wilson, now commanding the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment and apparently the task force commander. "Master Sergeant Parker," he said, his face breaking into a smile. "When they told me I'd be getting the military's foremost expert on adaptive leadership, I should have known it would be you." Madison returned his smile. "Colonel Wilson, congratulations on the regiment command." "Thanks in large part to what I learned from you," Wilson replied. He gestured toward the building. "We've got a command team assembling inside. Some of them are skeptical about having an enlisted advisor at this level. Most have heard of your program but haven't experienced it firsthand." Madison nodded, understanding the challenge ahead. "Then we'll have to show them why it matters." Inside the command center, a dozen senior officers were gathered around a large tactical display showing satellite imagery of the Balkan region. Maps, intelligence assessments, and operational analyses covered every available surface. The atmosphere was tense, with the weight of potential conflict hanging over every discussion. Wilson called the room to attention and made introductions. "This is Master Sergeant Madison Parker, Senior Leadership Development Advisor for our task force. She's the architect of the Integrated Leadership Initiative that many of you have heard about. She'll be working directly with me to ensure our command approach maximizes effectiveness across all operational elements." Madison could see the skepticism in some faces, the instinctive resistance of traditional military, thinking to what they perceived as soft skills in a hard environment. It was a reaction she'd encountered many times before. "Master Sergeant," said a Marine colonel with combat decorations that spoke of extensive experience, "with all due respect, we're planning for potential kinetic operations in a highly volatile region. How exactly does leadership philosophy factor into tactical planning?" It was a fair question, delivered without hostility, but with clear doubt. Madison stepped forward, her confidence unwavering. "Colonel, imagine your Marines are deployed to a village where 3 different ethnic groups are in conflict. Local police forces have divided loyalties, NGOs are operating with limited security, and intelligence suggests foreign operatives are deliberately inflaming tensions." She paused. "Now imagine your units must determine friend from foe, protect civilians, neutralize genuine threats, and build local trust, all simultaneously and under constant scrutiny from international media." The Marine's expression shifted slightly as he recognized the complexity of the scenario she described. "That's not a hypothetical," Madison continued. "That's exactly the situation we're likely to face. And in that environment, the quality of leadership at every level, from fire team to task force command, will determine whether we escalate or diffuse tensions, whether we create more enemies or win allies, whether we succeed or fail in our mission." She moved to the tactical display. "Traditional military training prepares us to defeat enemy forces. But this mission requires us to navigate cultural, ethical, and political complexities while maintaining tactical effectiveness." She looked around the room. That's why General Hayes has assembled this particular team, because he understands that the challenges ahead require a new approach to military leadership. The room was silent for a moment, then the Marine colonel nodded slowly. Point taken, Master Sergeant. I'm willing to be convinced. Over the next several hours, Madison observed the command team's planning process, noting their approaches to problem solving, communication patterns, and decision-making styles. By midday, she had identified both strengths and potential blind spots in their collective leadership approach. During a break, she found Wilson alone, reviewing intelligence reports with a concerned expression. Problem? Madison asked quietly. Wilson sighed. Latest intelligence suggests the situation is deteriorating faster than we anticipated. Civilian protests in 3 cities, paramilitary forces mobilizing, and strong indications that external actors are supplying weapons to multiple factions. He looked up. We may not have 3 months. It could be 3 weeks. Madison absorbed this information, recognizing the compressed timeline would make their leadership approach even more critical. How's the command team functioning from your perspective? Mixed, Wilson admitted. Technically proficient, certainly. But there are silos forming. The Marines and Army units aren't fully integrated in their planning. The intelligence officers are working somewhat separately from operations. And the cultural experts aren't being fully utilized. He ran a hand through his hair. It's typical military compartmentalization, but it won't work for this mission. Madison nodded. I've observed the same thing. They're approaching this as a conventional military operation with some added complexities, rather than recognizing that the complexity is the operation. Exactly, Wilson agreed. So how do we shift that mindset in a matter of days, not months? Madison considered the question. We don't have time for theoretical training or extended exercises. We need to integrate our leadership approach directly into the actual mission planning. She paused, starting with how we structure the command team itself. For the next 2 days, Madison worked closely with Wilson to implement subtle but significant changes to the task force's organization and planning processes. Rather than having separate work groups divided by service branch or functional area, they created integrated teams combining tactical operators, intelligence analysts, cultural experts, and information warfare specialists. Each team was responsible for developing comprehensive approaches to specific mission components, forcing them to consider challenges from multiple perspectives simultaneously. The results were striking plans that initially focused primarily on kinetic operations, now incorporated sophisticated cultural considerations, strategic communication elements, and conflict mitigation approaches. On the 3rd day, as the command team presented their revised operational concept, Madison noticed a fundamental shift in their thinking. They were no longer approaching the mission as merely the application of military force to achieve security objectives. Instead, they were developing a holistic approach to stabilizing a complex environment where security was just one component of a broader strategy. This is exactly what our leadership initiative was designed to achieve, she told Wilson after the briefing. Not just more effective tactical operations, but a fundamentally different understanding of what military intervention can and should accomplish. Wilson nodded. It's remarkable how quickly they've adapted. 3 days ago, most of them viewed your role with skepticism. Now they're seeking your input on everything from force composition to cultural engagement strategies. It's not about me, Madison replied. It's about creating an environment where diverse perspectives are valued and integrated into decision-making. Once people experience that approach and see its effectiveness, they naturally embrace it. As the planning continued, the intelligence picture grew increasingly concerning. Satellite imagery showed paramilitary forces establishing checkpoints around civilian communities, and communications intercepts suggested coordinated efforts to provoke ethnic violence. The window for preventive intervention was closing rapidly. On the 7th day, General Hayes arrived for a final briefing before deployment authorization. The command team presented their comprehensive plan, a sophisticated approach that balanced security operations with humanitarian support, cultural engagement, and strategic communication. When they finished, Hayes was silent for a long moment, studying the operational concept with a veteran's eye for both strengths and vulnerabilities. Finally, he looked up. In 35 years of military service, I've never seen an operational plan this comprehensive developed in such a compressed time frame, he said. The integration of security, cultural, and humanitarian considerations is extraordinary. He turned to Wilson. Colonel, you've built something remarkable here. This task force represents exactly the kind of adaptive, integrated approach our military needs to navigate the complex conflicts of the coming decades. Thank you, sir, Wilson replied. But I can't take credit for the transformation. Master Sergeant Parker's leadership methodology provided the framework that made this possible. Hayes nodded, turning to Madison. Which is precisely why I wanted you involved, Master Sergeant. This mission will serve as the ultimate validation of the approach you've championed not in training scenarios, but in one of the most challenging operational environments we face. His expression grew more serious. The President has authorized deployment, effective immediately. Your advance elements will move out within 24 hours. With the main force following in 72, you'll be operating under restrictive rules of engagement with significant political constraints, but with the full support of our diplomatic and intelligence assets. As the briefing concluded and the command team dispersed to prepare for deployment, Madison found herself alone in the planning room. Looking at the maps and operational graphics that represented so many lives, both the service members who would deploy and the civilians they hoped to protect. Wilson joined her, his expression reflective. 5 years ago, when you were assigned as my team leader in that training exercise, I resented having to follow someone I thought didn't belong in the program. He shook his head. I couldn't have been more wrong. Madison smiled slightly. We've both come a long way since then. Further than I could have imagined, Wilson agreed. And now we're about to test everything we've learned in the most demanding environment possible. He hesitated. Are you concerned? About whether our approach will work when the situation deteriorates, when our people are under fire and facing impossible choices. Madison considered the question carefully. I believe in what we've built, she said finally. Not because it's perfect or guaranteed to succeed, but because it represents the best of what military leadership can be: competent, adaptable, and guided by clear moral purpose. She looked at the operational graphics one more time. My mother used to say that the true test of leadership isn't how you perform when everything goes according to plan. It's how you respond when nothing does. She met Wilson's gaze. I think we're about to find out. 3 weeks later, Madison stood on a hilltop overlooking a small Balkan village where American forces had established what they called a stability zone, an area where civilians could find security, humanitarian support, and protection from the paramilitary groups that had been terrorizing the region. What had begun as a potential combat operation had transformed, through careful application of their integrated leadership approach, into something more akin to a shield than a sword. Task force units had neutralized specific threats with surgical precision while simultaneously providing security for civilian populations and creating space for local leaders to begin rebuilding governance structures. It hadn't been without cost. 3 American service members had been killed and a dozen wounded in targeted attacks by extremist elements. But compared to the regional war that intelligence had predicted, the outcomes were remarkable. Civilian casualties had been minimal, ethnic violence had been largely contained, and international support for the intervention was strong. Not quite what we expected when we deployed, is it? Said Colonel Wilson, joining her on the hillside. Madison shook her head. Military operations never unfold exactly as planned. But our people adapted because that's what we trained them to do, to see complexity as an opportunity rather than an obstacle. Below them, a patrol of rangers moved through the village. Not in combat formation, but in what they had come to call engagement posture, alert but approachable. Weapons ready but not threatening, their manner projecting both strength and respect for the local population. "Look at them," Wilson said softly. 6 weeks ago, most of those soldiers had never heard of your leadership program. Now they're living it, making decisions that balance security with cultural sensitivity, adjusting their approach based on local conditions, building relationships instead of just establishing control. Madison nodded. "And it's happening at every level, from the privates on patrol to the senior officers, coordinating with international organizations. They've embraced the approach because they can see it working." As they watched, a young sergeant stopped to speak with village elders, his interpreter beside him. Despite the language barrier, the body language was clear: mutual respect, genuine engagement, a relationship built on trust rather than fear or mere authority. "That sergeant," Wilson said, "reminds me of you when we first met, determined, competent, and absolutely committed to doing the right thing." He smiled, though I don't think he had to overcome an arrogant commander who tried to break him on his first day. Madison laughed softly. "Maybe not. But every leader faces resistance, whether from people, circumstances, or the weight of tradition. What matters is how you respond to it." Wilson's expression grew more serious. "General Hayes called this morning. The success of our approach here is being noticed at the highest levels. The President has directed the Defense Department to accelerate implementation of the Integrated Leadership Initiative across all service branches." He looked at her. "Your vision is becoming the new standard, Madison. Not just for special units or experimental programs, but for the entire military." Madison felt a profound sense of fulfillment, not pride in personal achievement, but satisfaction in knowing that the work they'd done would continue to shape military leadership for generations to come. What had begun as her personal journey to honor her mother's memory had evolved into something far greater, a transformation in how the armed forces developed leaders at every level. "There's something else," Wilson continued. "Hayes mentioned that when we return from this deployment, you'll be presented with the Distinguished Service Medal. It's unprecedented for someone of your rank, but the impact of your work has been, well, extraordinary." Madison's thoughts turned once more to her mother, to the photograph she had carried for so many years, and the legacy of service it represented. But now the image was just a cherished memory, not a standard she struggled to meet or a shadow she fought to emerge from. She had found her own path, created her own legacy, one built on the foundation her mother had provided, but shaped by her own experiences, insights, and courage in the face of those who had underestimated or opposed her. As the sun began to set over the Balkan hills, casting long shadows across the village below, Madison reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the determined private standing at attention in Captain Reynolds' office to the master sergeant who had helped reshape how the world's most powerful military approached leadership, it had been a path neither straight nor easy, but ultimately true to the values that mattered most. "What are you thinking?" Wilson asked, noticing her reflective expression. Madison smiled. "That sometimes the people who try to break you end up making you stronger than you ever thought possible. And that finding your own path doesn't mean forgetting where you came from. It means building on that foundation to create something new." She looked out over the village once more, at the soldiers and civilians, coexisting in a space of relative peace amid regional turmoil. At the tangible results of a leadership philosophy that valued humanity alongside tactical effectiveness. At the living embodiment of everything she had worked to build. "My mother used to say that true strength isn't measured by what you achieve for yourself, but by how many others you lift up along the way," Madison said quietly. "I think she would approve of what we've created here." As darkness fell and they prepared to return to the command post, Madison felt a sense of completion that transcended rank or recognition. The arrogant commander who had once humiliated her had become her strongest ally. The leadership approach they had developed together was transforming not just individual soldiers, but the very culture of military service. And her own journey from seeking approval to providing inspiration had come full circle. The war of wills that had begun in that office years ago had evolved into something neither of them could have imagined, a partnership that was reshaping how the world's most powerful military prepared its people for the challenges of an uncertain future. And Madison Parker, once just a determined private with something to prove, had become exactly the kind of leader the world needed most, someone who led not from position or authority, but from principle and purpose. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.